Herzlich willkommen. Vielen Dank, dass Sie da sind. Ich glaube, es ist ein besonderes Ereignis. Wir beenden das 25-jährige Jubiläum. Es ist wunderbar. Nicht nur das Kunsthaus Bregenz übrigens hat 25 Jahre gefeiert, sondern ich war vor 2-3 Tagen in Bilbao. Auch das berühmte Gebäude von Frank Gehry hat 25 Jahre gefeiert. Und ja, es ist vielleicht ein ähnlicher Effekt. Ich weiß, man spricht zwar nicht vom Bregenz-Effekt, aber der Bilbao-Effekt ist ein mittlerweile wirtschaftspolitischer Term geworden. Herzlich willkommen an Sie. Ich darf ein paar Gäste begrüßen. Werner Döring von den KUB, der Geschäftsführer, ist da. Jürgen Zumtobel, ein Mitglied unseres Aufsichtsrates, ist da. Ich darf mich bei den Sponsoren bedanken, bei den Illwerke VKW, bei der Hypo. Vertreterinnen von der Unica sind da. Herzlichen Dank, dass Sie auch an unserem Leben, an dem Leben dieser Ausstellung, an dem Leben dieses Kunsthauses teilnehmen. Und ein großer Dank natürlich an das Team vom Kunsthaus Bregenz. Das war wieder mal eine meisterliche Leistung. Aber ein noch größer thanks goes to you, Anna, because you invested so much work in this exhibition. So great to have you here. Ein Teil dieser Ausstellung haben viele vielleicht sogar von Ihnen schon gesehen, nämlich in Venedig, tatsächlich zum 25-jährigen Jubiläum in dieser wunderschönen Scuola, dieser Pasquale im ersten Stock, war das Schachspiel von Anna Boghiguian zu sehen, und das war ein Display von Figuren, die ausgeschnitten sind, fast lebensgroß. Fast alle dieser Figuren in Konstellationen, Konfrontationen, Korrelationen, fast alle diese Figuren waren österreichischer oder sind österreichischer Abstammung. Es ist ein Display, ein Ausschnitt österreichischer Geschichte. Die Zentralfigur, wenn man darauf gekommen ist in den ersten Stock dieses Hospiz, ist Marie Antoinette. Hier sehen Sie dieselbe Installation im zweiten Stock, im ersten Stock. Und daneben Maria Theresia, aber auch der Coiffeur von Marie Antoinette und dann einige Figuren, Protagonistinnen rund um Jahrhundertwende Wien um 1900. Da ist Egon Schiele, da ist Sigmund Freud, da ist Ludwig Wittgenstein, da sind viele andere mehr. Auch die Politiker der Zeit, Franz Ferdinand, der Thronfolger natürlich, und Felix Salten und der ominöse und berühmt-berüchtigte Aribert Heim, eine der Zentralfiguren. Anna Boghiguian hat dann dieses Display, diese Schachfiguren, wo es eigentlich auch darum geht, wo ich stehe. Bin ich ein Zionist oder bin ich ein Antisemit? Bin ich ein Anhänger der Monarchie oder bin ich ein Republikaner? Bin ich ein Anhänger sozusagen des Rokoko oder bin ich ein Revolutionär? Wo stehe ich eigentlich? Diese Fragen konnte man sich selbst stellen, wenn man da rundherum gegangen ist. Und das erleben Sie heute wieder hier in Bregenz, nochmal aufgestellt, aber vermehrt. Also die 16 Figuren haben sich vermehrt seitdem, und Anna Boghiguian ist seit 2. August, das ist mein Geburtstag, deswegen weiß ich es so genau, hier in Bregenz, hat aber schon vorher immer durchgehend für diese Ausstellung gearbeitet. Und praktisch alles, was Sie hier sehen können, ist hier in Bregenz entstanden, unweit von hier, unter Mithilfe natürlich des Teams, nämlich direkt im Postgebäude haben wir in den Räumen, die gemietet sind durch die KUB, haben wir ein Atelier eingerichtet, und dort hat sich wirklich täglich, auch am Wochenende, gearbeitet. Und alles, was Sie hier sehen, ist sozusagen hier entstanden und hat auch den Geist von Bregenz irgendwie und atmet ihn. Und da kommen 9 Figuren dazu, die über diesem Schachspiel schweben. Also es ist Nietzsche, es ist Stefan Zweig, es ist Hans Eisler, dem Susan Phillips, mit dem Anna Boghiguian befreundet ist. Ja, Sie wissen es, vor 7 Jahren eine wunderschöne Hommage geliefert hat, genau in diesem Haus. Und auch hier unten sehen Sie hinter uns ein riesiges Segel, ein Leinen, das bedruckt wurde in Arbon mit einer Zeichnung, die Anna selbst gefertigt hatte zuerst, und dann Pattern von Siebdrucken drauf gedruckt. Es sind 4, 5 Männer oder Figuren, Menschen, die marschieren, die sich versammeln. Einer hat eine Trommel, einer hat eine Fahne. Es ist sozusagen eine Bewegung, eine Initiative, vielleicht sogar der Beginn eines Aufstands. Und oben über diesem Segel, das in wunderschönem Lila ist und das danach bemalt wurde, beschriftet wurde, mit verschiedensten Farben, mit Gelb, Grün, Rot, Blau und so weiter und natürlich mit diesem charakteristischen Deckweiß, das im Deutschen diese wunderschöne Name Deckweiß, das ist die einzige Farbe, Sie erinnern sich an den Malkasten in der Volksschule, das ist die einzige Farbe, die wirklich opak ist, alle anderen sind ja durchsichtig. Weiter bearbeitet, jeden Tag. Und hier hängt es als Segel, eben nicht als Bild, nicht als Rahmen, sondern es ist aufgespannt. Es zeigt uns was, es zeigt uns eine Aktivität. Und darüber fast wie in einem Kranz und dann noch einmal in einem Firmament wieder diese ausgeschnittenen Figuren, diesmal Büsten und Köpfe, wieder Philosophinnen und Philosophen. Plato ist da, Popper ist da, Rosa Luxemburg ist da. Das sind, ich weiß keinen anderen Namen dafür, aber das sind diese Vor- und Nachdenkerinnen von Umwälzungen, von Revolutionen, von Umstürzungen, von Bewegungen, wo Menschen Gerechtigkeit, Freiheit und auch Gleichheit einfordern. Aber ich mache schon Schluss, also, weil Anna kann darüber viel, viel besser erzählen. So what I told the people, the audience is, your basic ideas are basically the French trials of...
I understood what you said a little bit.
Wonderful.
Well, maybe now they can ask me questions.
No, you tell them. So what about we start with the drawings.
About what?
The drawings.
Yes.
Tell us about the drawings.
Well, the drawings, I did them since quite a while. Of course, in order to do some of the drawings, I have to make some research. So it started much before. Of course, it starts all your life. And I did the drawings. I went to Versailles, and I did drawings in Versailles on Marie Antoinette, because, you know, she lived in Versailles. And then I went to, yes, I continued there. And then I went to Berlin, and I did the drawings of the house of Mr. Heim. Then I did some drawings in Cairo of Mr. Heim, because he lived in Cairo. And then I did some drawings in Bregenz. And then I did some, so the chess game, I did it mainly in Cairo, and some of it I did it in Bregenz. And the last floor, I did it in the fourth floor, I did it in Bregenz. The drawings, I used ink, and I used some watercolor, but mainly ink on paper. The paper is very old paper from the 1930s or 40s, and it is it's canson paper. Unfortunately, I have no more of it. And I did these drawings in some ways. It is in an expressionistic manner. Although it could have, I don't know how else I could have portrayed, but my style is expressionistic. The French Revolution, which ended up with the Russian, and in order to make a layering that wanted to show the image, two images, I did use plastic, but in reality I should not have used plastic, but I couldn't find it in Cairo. It had to be silicone, a film, but I couldn't find it in Cairo. So I used instead normal plastic that was sold to me as silicone. Anyway, so that was what I had. So I did some of the layering, and then I used the stitching. It was not really, it's not embroidery what I do, but it is sewing. The names, I sewed the names of the events with a thread. That was, one sort of thread was done that it is used for plovers, for summer cotton plovers, to knit cotton plovers. And the other kind of thread that I got them from Japan. So I was sent to me from Japan, so I used those also. That had a different texture than the cotton ones that are made in Cairo. Then I just drew in pencil, in ink, and sometimes I had watercolor in them.
And it's very...
And acrylic, I'm sorry, on the plastic.
And it's very important that you kind of... Some of them are very colorful. For example, the ones from Versailles. The drawings from Versailles are very...
Yes.
They are very colorful. And others are kind of only with pencil, like Hitler and...
Yes. Well, the Versailles, I used the house of Madame Marie Antoinette. I used it as in red, and her husband's bedroom, I used it in red, and it was very vivid. Of course, Versailles is a very colorful place, and it's very ornate, and it's very elegant, and it's very fine, while the drawings on Hitler and even some of the Trotsky are black and white pencil drawings, which, but Trotsky has but Lenin has at the end red, to the Russian Revolution was red. And anyway, but red can be a somber color, it cannot be necessarily a vivid color, although it is very vivid, but it can also be very dark. And Nietzsche, for the Aribert and the rise of the Nazis, I did in pencil. And Aribert at the end was some of his work. I did it in color, but the color is also very dark. So it wasn't really a vivid color, but a dark color. While Versailles, they had a lot of pomp, a lot of elegance, a lot of movement. So it's a different thing, and it was very elegant. It's different to be in France than to be in Cairo.
And you drew Aribert with teeth. Teeth are very important.
Yes, the teeth for Aribert is very important. He collected the skulls that had very beautiful teeth. And I mean, it's very difficult to go on saying how he did it, because I think that the man was a real criminal. But a real murderer, or a man with vice. And I don't know how he managed not to create crimes after the World War II ended. I question. He became a gynecologist.
And then he could escape to Egypt finally.
He went, when they were about to find out that he was Aribert Haim from Mauthausen, he escaped to Cairo. He escaped from Baden-Baden, where he was married to a wealthy doctor who came from a very wealthy anti-Nazi family. And she was married to the greatest Nazi that she chose to, because Aribert was a very polite, well-mannered, dignified-looking man. Although his nickname was, and he was very athletic, and he used to play hockey, and it seems that he had a very nice body, and his nickname was Closet, because he was 1.98 m and big as a closet. But I don't know if it's true that he was 1.98 m, but it may be. Anyway, so Aribert was living peacefully, making a lot of money as a doctor. And then he realized that people were following him. They had already once followed him because, first of all, when the war ended, he went to work in the salt mines and as a prisoner, and then he was let to go very quickly because they didn't connect him to any concentration camp. Then one day, a man called Lotte, who was his assistant, as well as a man, I forgot his name, it was Becker, I think, or something, Beckman, something like that, who was a playwright and had managed to run out of Mauthausen, to escape Mauthausen. He wrote a play where he wrote about Dr. Death and the Butcher of Mauthausen, and that was Aribert Haim. So Aribert Haim became focused, the government, the Germans government became focused that this was the man that was in Mauthausen, and it wasn't on his files. So they started looking for him, and first of all, he was in a small village working as a doctor after he had gone out of prison, and working with a hockey team in Linz, I think. And his sister used to work in the courthouse. So the sister received a search warrant for her brother. So she immediately notified him, and he immediately resigned from everywhere and escaped the same day. And he went to another city where he met this woman who was the doctor, and he was married to her till 1962, 6 years, when he escaped Baden-Baden, because suddenly they realized, the police found out he could be there in Baden-Baden, and because he received a phone call from somebody saying, "Are you Mr. Heim?" And he said, he realized he couldn't lie, and he said, "Yes." And they said, "You are the Heim from Mauthausen." So he couldn't lie. Then he was walking one day, and they caught him, the police, and they gave him an informal questioning. So he went to Berlin and connected with this doctor called Steiner. And Steiner said that because he used to take care of the affairs of the ex-Nazis, and Steiner also was in the fact that most probably he was pro-Nazi, he managed to get them, for example, instead of giving them 10 years of prison, they would get 2. So Steiner knew how to walk around the law. So he went to Berlin and he bought himself this house on 28 Teiwardenberger Strassen, and he left for, and then he went and he wrote that the money has to go to his sister Hertha, and he bought it from this real estate Wilhelm Dorset. And when he was caught that he had this house, Wilhelm Dorset said we couldn't ask the customer if he was a Nazi or not. We didn't know if it was him or not, so we are not responsible for this situation. But then the tax people found out that his sister Hertha had to pay 10,000 German Deutschmark, and the sister said that she did not have such money. And she used to be the one who used to smuggle all the rent of this building, which was 34 units, to Switzerland. And she used to have them rolled up, the money in her purse and in her jacket, because all the family was followed by the police because they wanted to know where this man was. And she would go to Switzerland and she would get the money at the Volksbank, and she would take the money from the Volksbank, she would take the money to Switzerland, to Zurich, and from Zurich she would send the money to Cairo. I don't know to which bank, maybe to American Express. But I don't understand how from all these transactions the police didn't know. But he had a strange name. He had made himself a name that he would receive letters and so forth as a Vernon company, a company that didn't exist. And it was post-restant that he would get the money there, the letters. But I don't know where he would get the money, where. And eventually, the police decided that they didn't do anything. They said that the tax people said we want 500,000. And they decided that this man Lotte and the police officer, I forgot his name now, they decided to, the Jews who were anti-Nazi, they decided to make write a big article in Die Sprengel where they decided that Mr. Heim was #1 man wanted for the Mauthausen concentration camp. And so the people, when they read this on the paper, that they were giving their money to a Nazi, they freaked out and they started demonstrating. And they decided to, because the whole street was many Jews lived there, and so they caught the Jews, and they had taken them to Auschwitz mainly. And there was a temple there, a synagogue or a temple, and they used to collect all the Jews in the temple, and then from the temple they would take them to Auschwitz. So it was unacceptable that so many people died on the street, and this man was acquiring the money, living comfortably and luxuriously in an ex-country they didn't know where. And he had nothing to do. He did not pay for his sins. So they made such a big fuss that they came together and they collected. They came to the conclusion that they will freeze his money. So all the time was in the newspapers the whole week of month on Aribert. And meanwhile, there was also a court case against him, and they had to find where he was. The lawyer was a very clever man. Before, all this happened, he went to Cairo with paper and ink that came from Germany, with a pen that came from Germany, with a record player, and he transcribed the voice of Aribert that he's still alive, etc. Because when you live outside, you pay less tax. And he went back, and of course he wouldn't say where Aribert lived. And I don't know why the police did not follow Steiner, but they didn't. And he had come with Lufthansa 1 hour, 1 day for Cairo. And they analyzed the papers, and they found that the paper was taken from Europe. And it was nothing, they couldn't figure out which country he was in. So Steiner said he cannot tell them where, because he had given Elijah, he had sworn to privacy and not to disclose the secrets of his customers. So he didn't tell them anything, and the court was, the son wrote to the father with the code name of Hansel and Gretel, and the son said that the father is like Gretel going to the woods. He ate, and one day he had no more hungry, and the bears will most probably eat him. So.
And finally, he supposedly died in 92, right?
And then, anyway, he was in Cairo. He moved from where the hotel he was in, Karnak. He moved to the hotel in another hotel, which was called Kasr Medina, and which means the palace of the city. And he stayed there in this small room with his Quran and his readings. And in 1981, he became a Muslim. His son decided that he wanted to see his father, the younger son. The older son refused to have anything to do with the father, and he took away the name Aribert, which was his first name. And the second son, Rudiger, he went to Cairo, and he took care. Then the father got the colon cancer, and Rudiger said the father died. The fact is that there was 1,000,002 Deutschmark in the bank, frozen for the inheritors. But Rudiger had also a stepsister, and the stepsister asked also for this inheritance money. She lived in Chile, but nobody had a death paper saying that Aribert had really died. But what is very strange, that the police had come to write supposedly that he was dead. He should have given a report to Aribert, to Rudiger, but Rudiger didn't have any papers to prove that his father really died. And then, this was in 92, August. In 2009, the hotel owners of Kasr Medina, they called the German television, and they said that they had, of the German embassy, they had a handbag from this German national. And they opened, and it was the papers of Aribert, the bag of Aribert's Heim.
You do a lot of research, right?
Well, I read from these people who had written the book, which was called The Eternal Nazi, but I also read a lot of other articles on the internet.
Marie Antoinette is a very important figure for your thinking.
Yes, Marie Antoinette is very important. Of course, I could have done hundreds and more drawings on her, but of course, she was not the subject. The subject became is really there a democracy? This is the question. And how come there was the Bolshevik Revolution, and the Bolshevik Revolution brought about the eminence of Nazism and fascism. And now in 2022, where there was the rise of Mussolini at the beginning of the Soviet Union, the world is going to back, of course, to that point. But of course, we will not have an exact Mussolini, we will not have an exact situation. It's not possible. But there is a possibility that the world will turn to those periods, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly 100 years ago, 1922.
Well, 100 years is nothing. You know, I'm 76, it's just an eyelash moment. I wink on the eye.
And you said once in another interview, it started also with a pandemic around It started with a pandemic.
Yes. The whole thing started with the pandemic of the Spanish flu, and it was the instability of the Italian government. Of course, now we have a lot of instability in Italian governments prior to Georgina, and there was a lot of, there was a pandemic, and Italy was a great victim to this pandemic, so they just found this woman, Mussolini, another one. I hope she doesn't get hung on her head down. Well, but it's fine.
And on top floor, there's a platform. On the top floor, there's a platform mirrored.
Anyway, after this, I realized suddenly that we are living in a world which is like in a dive box, or a joint, you know, where people go and dance, and they have their own ideals. They dance to certain music. They smoke a lot. They create a lot of pollution, and they create a lot of connections. And they also have in this situation people dancing, people acting, people rejoicing, which is, of course, it's interpreting verbally or vocally what is happening in the world. You know, when you go to a cabaret, what you see is what is happening in the world. It's not something that comes from the sky. So it really relates to all these connections. So I called it to dive into the dive box, because I think that we should dive into what is happening with all these politicians.
And there's two items suspended from the ceiling. It's the guillotine and the dress.
Yes, there is the guillotine, which it was used till the 70s in France, where most of the French Revolution was done. The head should go, and the head became literally, the head went, but also till now the head should go, goes on, but we don't have any more the guillotine. So, because it was forbidden, it was, and people went to, you know, there was first the Assemblée Générale, and people would go there and listen and rejoice. So they were forbidden, these peasants, to go there. So they went to the guillotine and they would rejoice and enjoy themselves. They would knit and shout and scream that the persons have died, and now the king died. It was a lot of drums, a lot of chanting that the king was killed. And the king said before he died, I'm innocent. It seems he was a very pious, honest man. Louis says, but of course he was corrupt, but everybody's corrupt in some ways when you are on that level. And he had the best library, it seems, and his library has moved to la Bibliothèque Nationale, and till now it survived. He created the best library. And anyway, when he died, the Joyce, the mob chanted "Vive la liberté." So Marie Antoinette knew that her husband had died, and it seemed that she cried and cried. But all this is hearsay. I mean, they say that she loved her husband. I don't know how far it's true, but maybe she did.
And there's another item, the dress of your mother.
Yes, so this is the black dress. Marie Antoinette wore black. So this is the black dress of Marie Antoinette, when she heard her husband died, but when she died, she was wearing a chemise, a white cotton thing that was, she made it up, with her hair cut with a razor anywhere by the people because they hated her, and she had a bonnet like the peasants, and they took it, and this was drawn by David. David was an important artist of the time, and he still is, and he is the one who documented what is happening during the French Revolution. So she went to the guillotine and stepped on the man who was going to build her up, but I don't think she did it on the purpose. She said, I'm very sorry. And the mob was thinking that she would scream and shout and cry, that she didn't want to be guillotined, but she worked with the greatest dignity and just died. And the daughter cried a lot. The son, we don't know what they did to the son, but he died. But we don't know if they let him starve to death or they tortured him to death.
And Marie Antoinette was influenced by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And
she loved Jean-Jacques Rousseau. She was a great lover of Jean-Jacques Rousseau on the simple life and the education, and she wanted to educate her children through Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Maybe Marie Antoinette in some ways wanted a revolution, wanted a simpler life for the royalty, but she didn't assume there would be such a guillotine. And I think it was very barbaric of the French to do it, but maybe blood is necessary, which I don't think it's so necessary.
And what is the purpose of art?
Well, I said that it keeps you alive. And it gives you healing, and it shows in the way that your pains are gone when you see the artworks. That's what I see. It heals the soul. It's a spirituality. I mean, for example, when you sit in this room, there is a special feeling in this room if you let yourself go without looking at the material side, but of the spiritual side, that you find that this room has a healing power, a strong energy, like going into a temple.
And you improved it?
Maybe. Anyway, that's all I can say, because I'm very sorry, but I'm getting very tired. So if you have any questions, please ask.
Yes, please ask. Wir haben vorbereitet noch, glaube ich, einen Fototermin im ersten Stock mit den hängenden und stehenden Figuren. Des Weiteren wollte ich Sie noch aufmerksam machen auf unsere kommenden Veranstaltungen. Natürlich am Freitagabend die Eröffnung, am Samstagmorgen noch einmal ein Gespräch mit Anna Boghiguian und mir. Wie üblich das sogenannte Künstlerinnengespräch. Aber dann geht es weiter munter in der nächsten Woche, die ja auch eine Ferienwoche sein wird. Am Dienstag, am Nachmittag ab 13 Uhr fahren wir in einer kleinen Gruppe. Sie sind herzlich eingeladen, auf Initiative des Jüdischen Museums Hohenems mit Hanno Löwy und mir an die Grenze, an verschiedenen Erinnerungsstationen an die Grenze. Es ist ein ähnlicher Themenbereich. Es geht natürlich sozusagen um den Drang nach Freiheit, um den Drang nach Gerechtigkeit, aber auch um Gleichheit und gegen Diskriminierung. Und dann geht es weiter am Nationalfeiertag, am 26. Oktober haben wir ein Schacharrangement arrangiert. In dem Geschoss mit dem Schachspiel von Anna Boghiguian können Sie dann auch Schach spielen und es gibt Führungen und so weiter. Also wir versuchen sehr offen zu sein in der kommenden Woche, aber nicht nur in der kommenden Woche, sondern sowieso immer und für unser Publikum. Und herzlichen Dank, dass Sie da sind. And many thanks to you, Anna, for this enormous and magnificent rhetoric. Memory to our history.
Thank you.